iPhone 16 30 days later. In this video, I'm going to give you my experience after using this brand new phone for over a month. And let me tell you, there is a lot to be said. This is probably the best normal iPhone or baseline iPhone I've seen in a while, also the most exciting. But it also has some major flaws that make it pale in comparison to the Pro version of the phone. So, as always, let's begin by talking about the exterior design, which is completely new for the first time in a while. So we had this weird angled camera layout where one camera was here and the other one was in this sort of tilted orientation. But now we've actually come back to the vertical orientation we had on the old iPhone 11 and iPhone 12. This is because the iPhone 16, and we'll see it later in the camera section, can actually record, let me show you, spatial mode. I've not even activated the mode because I don't have Vision Pros, but if you have Apple Vision Pros, you can now shoot a spatial video and photo on the iPhone 16 to then play it on your very expensive Vision Pros. This is very cool for the 3 people that have a pair of Apple Vision Pros. Now, besides that, we also get a slight change to the casing on the cameras. Now it is slightly smaller and leaves the flash out of the casing, which makes for a slightly, new design. It feels fresh in comparison to the old iPhone 15. But besides that and a couple fresh new colors, the design on the back is almost identical. Now, on the sides, we do get a couple new advancements when it comes to functionality. For the first time, we get the action button on the normal iPhone. So we can now, instead of just being able to mute the phone, we can now do other things like turning on the flash, which is the option that I have set on my phone. And on the right side, which is new for the 16 and 16 Pro, we also get the camera control functionality, which we'll talk about later. It is a hit or miss in my opinion. I'm not the biggest fan of this specific feature, but it is available for free on the iPhone 16 series. Now, being fair, I think the iPhone 16 feels fresh enough to justify an update from someone that comes from an iPhone 13 or 14, as opposed to the very stale Pro model, which has looked exactly identical since the iPhone 11 Pro. And even though internal components are always new in both models, the fact that the external design is almost identical kind of deters you from updating because it feels like you're getting the same thing again, which doesn't happen so much on the iPhone 16 or normal iPhone series. Oh, and by the way, before I forget, I left links for the iPhone 16 and 16 Plus down below in the description with the best prices that I found on Amazon. So if at the end of the video you want to buy it or take a look, remember you have the link. But anyways, that being said, let's move on with the internal components, which is another very big change on the iPhone 16. Because we go from the A16 processor to the A18 processor. So it's a 2-generation jump when it comes to the CPU plus GPU. I think it is a 30% increase in power, which may seem like it's not that much, but considering that on the Pro series we are getting 10 to 15% updates every year, 30% is a great deal of an update as opposed to the previous model. Of course, I don't think I have to tell you, the experience navigating around the device and opening apps is really good. Everything loads up instantaneously. It feels amazing. There's no stutters, no lags, even with the kind of unoptimized iOS 18, which we'll talk about later. But yeah, generally speaking, I don't think it's a surprise to anybody. A new flagship iPhone is, of course, going to work and feel incredibly well. Oh, and it also has 8 gigabytes of RAM, which is the same amount we have on the Pro models. So every app you open is probably going to remain open for a long, long time. I've actually had times when I didn't charge the phone for 3 days in a row, and every app stayed open. I mean, Instagram, YouTube, Amazon, App Store, TikTok, all those basic casual apps will never close unless you turn off the phone, turn it on again, start charging, or wait for weeks. Unless you're using a very demanding app, which takes up all the RAM, you're going to have a flawless experience. It's almost like you don't even have to load up apps anymore because they're all opened in the background. So yeah, once again, the experience is incredible, which is what you probably expected from a phone like this. Now, there's only one flaw on this phone that affects the user experience when it comes to how fast and how fluid it feels. But it has nothing to do with RAM or CPU or GPU. It's actually because the display, and you know where I'm heading probably, still has a 60 Hz refresh rate, which is a little disappointing in 2024. Well, actually, almost 2025 at this point. But anyways, I get why Apple doesn't include it. It feels really good. And if you're not trained or you're not a techie, you don't really notice the difference between 60 and 120. The problem here is that many of us actually do. People who like technology or people who spend a ton of money on their new phone, they are not necessarily looking for noticeable things. They are looking for those extra little details that make for a premium experience. Premium has never been about big details that make a big difference. It's always been about the little things that make up for that extra tier of smoothness, greatness, sharpness. So even though the majority of people buying this phone are not going to notice a difference, I don't think that is a good justification to not include that feature, because majority of people would also probably not notice aluminum being a little thinner and less quality. They would probably also not notice the display having a little bit less brightness or the display being a little bit less quality. They would probably not notice the sensors being a little bit smaller, but they are good anyways because it's a very expensive device and it has to be perfect for the people who notice and for the people who don't. So yeah, I think this is the main flaw on this phone, that it doesn't have a fast refresh rate display, because you may not notice today, but it only takes a couple hours with the good feeling display 120 Hertz to actually not be able to come back to 60, or at least feeling very uncomfortable navigating on a phone that's only 60 Hertz. So I hope next year, finally in 2025, after 7 or 8 years since that feature was implemented on Android phones, Apple decides to include 120 Hertz on their baseline iPhone, which is, by the way, is almost $1,000. Now, as I said earlier, I'm not really happy with iOS 18, and don't get me wrong. On paper, most of the new features on iOS 18 are great, like being able to place icons anywhere you want on the display, or being able to customize icons to be darker or any color you want. In fact, you can turn them into any potential color in the rainbow if that's what you want, although I don't think they look particularly attractive. You can even make them bigger or smaller. It gives you a lot of customization options. On the home screen, you can also do this. On the control center, you can also do this. Let me show you. On the lock screen, you can actually customize for the first time the quick functionalities on the bottom. You can add any icon you want, for example, calculator, both on the left and on the right. So that's great. I'm grateful for this extra customization we get, but it almost feels like Apple didn't want to admit the Android way was the right way. So they still added some of the weird magnetization to the icons we saw on older iPhone versions. So you can technically, yes, move anything anywhere you want if it's not surrounded by other icons. But if it is surrounded by other icons, like the YouTube icon, for example, they are not going to leave an empty hole where the YouTube icon was, so you can place another icon instead. The iPhone is actually going to do a smart magnetization relocation of the icons to the position they think is best based on the movement you've made. So let me actually demonstrate what I mean. Let's take the YouTube icon out of where it is. And as you can see, they didn't leave a hole. The iPhone auto filled that hole with another icon, repositioning everything where they thought was best. So It is still a challenge, a 30-minute feat to position icons exactly where you want them to be. In fact, if you want to be finicky with placement, you probably have to leave icons in a page and then start one by one bringing everything to another page so you can set everything up the right way. Because if you try to relocate icons on the same page, the iPhone is just going to start magnetizing everything to the position they see fit, as you can see, and it's going to turn... There it is. I'm not going to leave this out of the video because it's really painful to move icons around the iPhone because of that magnetization. This, of course, also affects the control center. So if you want to move one specific icon, well, you're going to see what happens. The iPhone is going to relocate everything based on that movement. So if you want to take everything back to their original positions, it's just going to become really difficult. Like, there's a ton of extra movements. It almost feels like it just doesn't trust you with what you want to do, so it does it automatically all the time, thinking it knows best. And this is very similar to the criticism that I had with the app library, which doesn't let you name folders, doesn't let you choose what goes in the folders. It is all done automatically for you by the iPhone, which is always wrong. I want to organize things the way that I want to organize things, not the way the iPhone wants to. So yeah, I hope that Apple works on these flaws next year because, yeah, Apple, you were wrong. Just be ballsy and admit it. Let me choose the way that I want to organize icons. That's the way it's been done on Android since the first Android phone. And yeah, it's the right way to do it. It's giving the customer a little bit more control. We are not stupid. Please, Apple. But anyways, back to the good news. On top of a really good looking design, a really good processor, and 8 gigabytes of RAM, we also get really good battery life. I'm not really sure how they've done it because the size of the iPhone 16 is identical to the size of the iPhone 15. So they were not able to make that big of a difference when it comes to the battery size. But even then, the battery life is dramatically better. I mean, it's not double the battery on the iPhone 15, but it is noticeable. Like, there's a noticeable difference in how long it lasts as opposed to the old version, which is always great because I'm a big fan of relatively compact phones like the 6.1 inch 16 or the slightly bigger 6.3 inch 16 Pro, but I also like a really good battery life, and for a long time it felt like you had to make a compromise. If you want a small phone, it is going to have bad battery life, and if you want a good battery life, you're going to have to get a big phone. There was no way around it, and now it's starting to feel like with this 6.1 to 6.3 inch size, they are managing to give us batteries that are good enough for a full day, no matter what you do. Now, when it comes to the cameras on this phone, we get some solid improvements. First off, we get a new ultra-wide camera with a bigger sensor and better optics. That, for the first time ever, and this is very exciting, has macro capabilities. So we can take a very up-close picture of a subject, just like this, which is something we could only do on the Pro version of the phone, I think since the iPhone 13 Pro. So for 3 generations, it was a Pro exclusive feature. Now it is available on every model of the iPhone lineup. Now, when it comes to the main sensor, it is exactly the same as the one on the iPhone 15, which is not a bad thing. It is big enough, it has 48 megapixels, and when comparing pictures and videos to the ones taken on the iPhone 16 Pro, I was not able to notice any differences. This one is a little bit bigger, it has a slightly better lens, but because the difference is so small and most of the image quality now comes from the processing done by the device, the difference is indistinguishable in sharpness, dynamic range, and every other way. They are both the same. So you're not going to gain any advantages in photography if you get the Pro version of the phone. Now, there is one big flaw that I found on the iPhone 16 when it comes to camera, and it is funny because that flaw is its new headline feature, the camera control button. This is a button that is meant to quickly launch the camera or quickly take a picture just by pressing on it, on top of giving you full control of everything you could do on the touch controls before without having to touch the display. So if you light press on the button, just like this, You get sort of like a contextual menu where you can switch between cameras, the zoom range, the aperture, the exposure, every setting you want to change on the camera, so you don't have to touch the display to change that specific setting. Now, the problems that I found with this new functionality are that first, it is rarely faster than actually touching on the display. I mean, most of the time it is dramatically slower, like zooming in or changing the exposure is really fast using the touch controls. And most of the time, for example, if you want to change the exposure, like look at how much time it takes as opposed to touching on the display. It is dramatically slower most of the time. And it also becomes incredibly inconvenient because there is no way, and please tell me if I'm wrong, there's no way to dismiss the menu manually without affecting the touch controls at the same time. So imagine you want to dismiss the menu, you have to swipe away. But if you swipe away, you also swipe on the photo/video mode. So you go from photo to video or from video to cinematic. There is no way to skip the menu without also changing the touch controls, which is very annoying. And even worse, this is for left-handed people like me. When you grip the phone, the button is going to be placed exactly in the same position, precisely where you rest your middle finger. So if you make the mistake to grip the phone with a little too extra force, it is very easy to trigger this custom button, which a lot of times actually takes away the controls on the touch controls, and then you want to swipe it away, then you also change it's a mess. I don't want to get into it because I get aroused and I get mad, but yeah, it's really inconvenient and annoying. So in fact, this is not my personal device, I actually use the 16 Pro. I've actually come to the accessibility settings, then come to camera control and disabled the light press functionality. So I can access the camera by touching the button. I can press to take a picture or record a video. There it is. But I can't actually light press to access the contextual menu because, first off, as I said, I didn't gain anything from it. It didn't give me any functionality that I didn't have before with the touch controls, but also because it was constantly being accidentally triggered, and then I was changing the touch controls on accident all the time. It was a mess. So yeah, the headline feature on the iPhone 16 is actually not that useful. But anyways, that being said, I don't want you to have a sour taste about the iPhone 16. As I said, it has a very good looking design, really good internal components, really good battery life, which are actually the things that matter. And it has very solid cameras, really good cameras. There's a couple flaws, of course, like with every other phone. The camera control may not be that useful as we thought it would. The display is still at 60 hertz, and well, that's about it. Those are the two main flaws on this phone. But besides that, I think it is a really good device, and it's worth the money it costs. If you come from an iPhone 11, 12, 13, and you feel like you want to upgrade to a new device because your phone is already starting to lag or because you feel like upgrading, this is going to be a noticeable upgrade, and you're really going to enjoy it. So I do recommend it. As I said, for those of you who want to buy it or take a look, I left links for the phone on Amazon. And well, now that the video is about to end, I recommend you go take a look.